In the history of nuclear warfare, we have grim baselines. This is Little Boy, the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. And years later, the United States detonated Castle Bravo, the most powerful nuclear weapon they had ever tested. This diagram shows the true scale of that power. We start with a tiny dot for Hiroshima, a larger circle for Castle Bravo, and then this massive expanding sphere is RDS-220, better known as Tsar Bomba. Built in the Soviet Union, it remains the largest human-made explosion in history. At 50 megatons, it was roughly 3,800 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The 50 megaton yield was actually a compromise. The original blueprint called for a bomb twice as powerful, but the very scientist who engineered it stepped in at the last minute to reduce its yield. The resulting explosion was so terrifying that its chief architect spent the rest of his life fighting the very government he built it for. By the late 1950s, the United States and the Soviet Union had agreed to a voluntary pause on nuclear testing. They were scheduled to meet in Paris in May 1960 to discuss formal disarmament. But days before the summit, the Soviets shot down an American U-2 spy plane deep inside their territory, capturing the CIA pilot. The peace talks collapsed immediately. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev demanded an apology. When President Dwight Eisenhower refused, Khrushchev stormed out. By 1961, John F. Kennedy was sworn in as the new U.S. president. Viewing Kennedy as young and inexperienced, Khrushchev decided to project absolute Soviet dominance. He summoned his top scientists to the Kremlin and ordered them to break the testing moratorium. This counter illustrates the math calculated by Andrei Sakharov, the lead physicist behind the Soviet hydrogen bomb. He opposed the new tests, calculating that for every megaton of nuclear force detonated in the atmosphere, radioactive fallout would eventually cause over 6,600 premature deaths globally due to cancer and genetic abnormalities. Sakharov pleaded with Khrushchev to stop. Khrushchev flatly refused, telling the physicist to stick to science and leave the politics to him. He wanted a new bomb, and he demanded a 100 megaton yield. Khrushchev's demand for the world's largest weapon grew from a wounded political ego rather than a strategic military objective. Khrushchev gave Sakharov's team exactly 16 weeks to conceptualize, design, and build this untested 100 megaton device. The deadline was so tight, they had to skip rigorous mathematical proofs and rely entirely on approximations. Standard bombs use primary fission to ignite a secondary fusion core. Tsar Bomba utilized two simultaneous primary triggers to ignite a third, massive fusion stage. To prevent radioactive blowback on Soviet cities, Sakharov secretly replaced the uranium tamper with lead, halving the explosive yield. By crippling his own design, Sakharov intentionally reduced the lethal scope of the weapon. He prioritized hundreds of thousands of lives over the specific demands of the state. Even at half capacity, the physical bomb was massive. It weighed 25 tons and was 8 meters long. When the modified bomber flew toward the remote Arctic archipelago of Novaya Zemlya in October 1961, the bomb was strapped to a massive parachute, slowing its descent to give the flight crew a 50% chance of outrunning the blast. At an altitude of 4,000 meters, it detonated. The first fraction of a millisecond was a silent, blinding flash of light, visible from 1,000 kilometers away. The surrounding air superheated to 100 million degrees Celsius, roughly 5 times hotter than the center of the sun. This map tracks the immediate destruction beneath the drop zone. The fireball itself never even touched the ground, but everything within a 35-kilometer radius directly beneath it was completely vaporized, leveling the terrain. 35 seconds later, the mushroom cloud violently breached the stratosphere and the mesosphere, peaking at 64 kilometers high. That is 7 times the height of Mount Everest. The resulting atmospheric shockwave was the loudest human-made sound in history. It traveled around the Earth 3 times. It shattered windows as far away as Finland, and the force of the wave hit the fleeing bomber plane so hard that it plummeted nearly a kilometer before the pilots regained control. The drop was a flawless execution of physics, but it unleashed an uncontrollable force of nature that terrified the scientists who built it. Despite its overwhelming power, Tsar Bomba was entirely useless as a military weapon. It was far too heavy to attach to an ICBM, and any plane carrying a 25-ton bomb would be easily shot down before reaching its target. Militaries quickly calculated that delivering several smaller, targeted warheads is much more practical and highly more destructive than dropping one massive gravity bomb. Because the fireball didn't make contact with the Earth, Tsar Bomba was classified as a clean test relative to its yield. But the blast still trapped massive amounts of radiation in the stratosphere, where it circled the globe for years. Today, scientists find high radiation trapped in glaciers near the test site. As they melt, they release secondary fallout into the Barents Sea. Indigenous populations near the region experienced significantly higher levels of chromosomal diseases and birth defects, a grim reality the Soviet Union covered up for decades. Beyond the physical explosion, the test left a legacy of generational disease hidden under a veil of state secrecy. Witnessing the horrific reality of the blast, combined with the government's subsequent environmental cover-up, permanently severed Andrei Sakharov's loyalty to the Soviet regime. Sakharov turned his high-profile status as a state scientist into a platform for dissent. He launched a fierce, increasingly dangerous campaign against his own government's atmospheric testing program. His relentless activism helped push the two superpowers back to the negotiating table. In 1963, the US and the USSR signed the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, officially prohibiting atmospheric detonations. For his persistent push for global disarmament, the creator of the world's most destructive weapon was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1975. The Emperor of Bombs failed to win the Cold War. Instead, the terror it inspired forced its own creator to help write the treaty that protected the atmosphere from further destruction.